If anybody has questions, I think now is a good time to open it up to the audience. Just a couple of guidelines. There are microphones stationed around the room. The rules are, start off by introducing yourself, keep your question short, and make it a question that ends in a question mark. So if we have any questions.
My name is Jeff Lipton. My family has voted Republican since my great-grandmother was convinced FDR was a communist. Just a joke. Up until this election, I voted Republican every single time, but I switched my party affiliation to Libertarian because I just can't stand for who's at the top of the ticket. But my real question is, twice in the last 8 years, the voter base of the Republican Party has rejected the party leadership in the form first of the Tea Party and then of Trump. What ideas must the party really sacrifice or embrace in order to evolve to the times?
Great question.
It's a very good question.
Well, I mean, the ironic thing about Trump's election is that there were a number of conservatives, I think everybody on this panel, among them, who felt that the Republican Party needed to change. That it was forever, you know, the election of 1980. Tax rates were perpetually at 70%, and that we needed to rerun that Reagan playbook over and over again. And there were a bunch of us saying, no, listen, we love Reagan. I mean, on a bad day, I'll go to YouTube and I'll watch his Morning in America commercials from '84. And I'll get a little weepy every time. But times have changed, the economy has changed, and while those sorts of general values about unleashing the free market are as timeless as ever, that they need to be applied in different ways. Especially they need to be applied toward looking at what was happening with the poor and middle class in this rapidly evolving economy. So we're like, we have all these great new ideas to address all these issues, and then no one really listened to those ideas, and Donald Trump kind of ran on, we need to pay attention to this, to the working class. But he has all horrible ideas. So that was a huge sort of missed opportunity. Trump, I think, particularly by candidates who really did not run on a new agenda, they still ran on that old agenda, and that I think that opened up space for someone to run on a different kind of, and it was Donald Trump. So that's a little frustrating. Like it'll be like the most frustrating thing probably for the rest of my life. And now I think it's time for people who think there should be a different, more relevant 21st century agenda to keep pushing those ideas and sort of wait for the game to come back to them a little bit. Because I don't think protectionism and going back to the economy of 1965 ultimately is a winning strategy.
If you need a pick-me-up, by the way, I highly recommend Margaret Thatcher Prime Minister's Questions YouTube clips. That's my go-to. Go for it.
I mean, I think this event is about the agenda, and we've been talking a lot about concrete policies. I would say most of what Trump is about and what is creating these tensions has nothing to do with policy at all, and has a lot more to do with his persona, his background, the way he conducts himself, the groups he attacks. If you imagine, say, Marco Rubio essentially had Trump's entire agenda, like right up to no refugees, kind of going to really relook at trade policy, et cetera, but did it in a Marco Rubio way. My guess is you would have very few people saying, I'm out, I'm no longer a Republican. And so I think it's important to keep in mind that there are definitely policies that have to change, but what's causing a certain group of people to react in horror is more Donald Trump the person than whatever vague ideas may sit behind him, except for the kind of very unique Donald Trump xenophobic ones. But also that it's a huge threat to the Republican Party and conservatism. I mean, there is an entire generation of people who is going to associate Trump rightly with the Republican Party, to some extent with conservatism, and to the extent that people in Congress have no choice, even if they're transactional, to effectively be on his team. That's going to have very long-reaching and frankly, I think, unavoidable consequences that we're going to have to start picking up the pieces on sooner rather than later.
I mean, all I would say is I think it's just a matter of emphasis. Like we're for the same things. I think conservatives have always had an outsized influence in the party. So it's not as though the Republican Party was, as thoroughgoingly conservative as like Oren and me and these. I mean, we represent. We're very overrepresented, I think, in like policy making circles, and in our ideas are certainly not ones that are shared by the entire electorate. And so I think this is just a case in which, like, you know, as much as I'm a free trader, we may have to just take a step back on trade policy for a little while and emphasize some other things. I mean, I don't think you abandon those things. I don't think you make arguments against them. But I think that you've got to pick your battles. And this may not be the best time, you know, to try to do a big trade deal with Asia. I mean, I just think that we've got to be realistic about where the public is right now and try to get some things right so that the conditions are political, you know, the political conditions are right so that we can come back, I think, and make those arguments again.
Hi, thanks so much. My name's Marla, and I'm a student here at the Kennedy School. And I wanted to ask about another topic that maybe is on the conservative agenda, but not so popular right now with the president, and that's immigration reform. You talked a little bit about thinking about how the types of immigrants that are coming into this country relate to growth especially. So I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on what the conservative agenda on immigration reform and especially on labor mobility should be versus where you think the party is right now.
Good question.
Well, I mean, one of my huge concerns is that let's say that, you know, what we're seeing in immigration policy, let's say it ends up being about you know, sending back the undocumented. Let's say it's about keeping out low-skill workers. Let's say that's as far as it goes. My concern is that the general message that sends is that America is just not a particularly welcoming place to immigrants. So even if you're, you know, a foreign entrepreneur, or you have a PhD in, you know, molecular biology, that you're thinking, you know what, forget it. That's not the country I thought it was. You know, now it's easier for me to do what I want to do in my home country. That's, you know, so I'll just stay there. And I mean, to me, you know, the kind of the secret sauce of the American economy is that you have all these people all around the world who think, you know what, if I want to do something amazing in my life, there's no better place to do it than the United States and America. And if people stop thinking that, I'm not sure how you calculate that. I'm not sure what the economic model says, how that, you know, works out to GDP. But we've lost something, a tremendous asset, and that's what I fear with this immigration policy, as well as the human costs of deporting people, of course.
I mean, Gang of Eight's dead, right? We're not doing that. Like, that's off the table. I think we've tried to do that in sort of every possible configuration of Congress and the presidency since 2000, you know, from 2006 to 2013, you know, Republican president, Democratic Congress, Republican president, you know, mix. I mean, we've done everything. And it's not, there's just not the political support there for it. So I think probably what you'll see is, like I said, I think he builds the wall. I think that we see a step up in enforcement, and I think that in that circumstance that even conservative voters would be open, and I think Trump seems open to letting the dreamers stay. Hopefully in a few years, I think you legalize the adults. I just think that the American public wants to see enforcement first, and I think we've just realized, I mean, that this is, you know, trying to do some big package is just too much, that it's got to be a piecemeal approach, and that Americans have to believe that our immigration system works, that we're serious about our borders. And I think that means that we have to see, you know, a year or two at least of stepped up enforcement before we see any liberalization.
I feel like we've all spent the whole discussion berating the right, so I'll take one opportunity to berate the left, which is that the way that immigration has become a conflated issue of legality of immigration, low-skilled immigration, migrant workers, skilled immigration, has been a complete disaster just for the country, just for making good policy, because those are very different issues. And I think Jim is exactly right that as all this attention gets focused on one part of the issue, it's going to have spillover effects for the other. But I think that was unavoidable at this point. There was no other solution that was going to actually potentially cleave these things apart. And so this is now going to be a very painful cleaving. It's going to have negative effects. But there's at least, this is something optimistic, there's at least a light at the end of the tunnel where if we now actually have license to get serious about enforcement, then I think there will at the back end of that be appetite for letting the dreamers stay and then for starting to rebuild the message that America does want the best and the brightest, and actually guess what, you can do that while enforcing your laws at the same time.
Just one more thing. To me, these are perfect examples of the wall, immigration, trade, where we are going to spend a lot of energy and time on non-problems. The wall is not. I don't think the wall is stopping a real problem. I don't think deporting people is preventing a real problem. Worrying about trade with China, it's a little bit late. I'd worry a lot more about automation, which Trump talked about, not at all. So I just think, this is like a tremendous waste of time with perhaps huge long-term consequences. But that's what we're going to spend the next 2 years doing. And maybe we'll get all those things, but we don't get a better health care plan if Republicans can somehow manage it. And we don't get tax reform, which even Democrats agree that we need.
But in terms of what we should be doing, I think we should be moving away from sort of family, unification and more towards like a skills-based, policy. And I think that's something like Oren said that there's hope, I think, for that. But I think the public is going to demand that we see our laws enforced.
I also think, I'll say one more thing, because disagreement is always great on a panel. I don't think it flies for conservatives to say, well, back when we were telling you there was nothing wrong with China, it did in fact destroy a couple million jobs, but that's over now, so it is no longer constructive to talk about it. Or back when we were saying the more, illegal immigration, the more guest workers, the better, turns out we were wrong about that, but now that's leveled off, so you can't ask for a border wall. I think some of it may in fact be political posturing, but I also think it's a healthy function in our democracy and just necessary that these things get addressed, even if it's a little bit late and even if it sounds like not the best policy. I don't think we can just move forward with saying we were wrong about immigration with trade, but we're right about it now, so we don't have to talk about it. I think we have to clear that out of the system.
I think politicians should always tell the truth. I think they should always try to talk about economic reality. I don't think it was super helpful for Trump to go to Pittsburgh and talk about he's going to open up the mines. And he's going to bring back steel. He's going to bring back American steel in Pittsburgh. At the same time, not saying a word that you have Google in Pittsburgh, you have Uber, which are going to bring tremendous things, but also may bring tremendous labor market challenges. You're selling nostalgia people and some sort of bridge to this mythical golden age, and the 60s and 50s were in golden ages for everybody, rather than using that valuable time and that podium to actually talk about the challenges facing America in 2017 and going forward.
Question or not?
Oh, I apologize.
I could go up there.
I didn't even see this.
Another cleavage in the conservative movement and the government in general is over foreign policy. The neocons wing of the party generally supports a unipolar world, aggressive interventionism, hostility to Russia, airtight alliance with Israel, but the more traditional conservatives are skeptical about all of those things. Trump was an anti-interventionist during the campaign, but he's being pushed hard now by the neocons to take up the so-called Washington consensus. We still haven't really settled, either in the conservative movement or in society, on the purpose and direction of American foreign policy yet, have we?
No, we haven't. Right. I mean, obviously, foreign policy is still feeling the the aftermath of the Iraq War, and I'm not sure. If you ask me, like, what is sort of the conservative reformer position on like the earned incomes tax credit, I think we could talk about it, or entitlement reform or something else. But on foreign policy, I think that's extraordinarily unclear, and I'm going to give this an extraordinarily unsatisfactory answer.
Yeah. I mean, I just don't think that, I think you're right. I think there are divisions, there are certainly divisions on the right in terms of what we should be doing with our foreign policy. It doesn't seem to me that, it seems to me that a lot of those divisions, though, have been closing. That was certainly my perspective from the campaign, that it used to be that you sort of had these like neoconservative camps and the realists, and it did seem to me like in the past 2 years there's been some closing of the gaps there. In terms of what Trump's going to do and like his foreign policy, I mean, I don't know. We've been so distracted and by the Russia stuff and the his obsession with China and other things that we've, I don't know how much strategic thinking there's been done. Oren may have more to say there. I do domestic policy. I don't have a lot. I don't have a lot to say, but I'm concerned about how the rest of the world sees us. I do think that Obama did tremendous damage to our reputation in the world, and that needs to be repaired. I don't know that Trump's the guy to do it.
Oren, is there such a thing as conservative foreign policy?
I don't do foreign policy either. I'm very suspicious of people who do foreign policy because they always seem to make it up as they go along. I think, for me, I think it's a personnel question at this point. I feel like the National Security Administration is kind of a Connect Four board, and we're just like hoping that a competent person will eventually land in each of the columns. And we seem to be doing well on that. But I think that competent people is the threshold at this point more than kind of resolving any of the central debates.
But I mean, if you're just reading the front page of the New York Times, the idea that our president is having heated conversations with, the Australians is concerning. I mean, it's just, there's not a lot of signs of health in terms of his ability to be a successful diplomat.
More is war-making intent than just.
Yeah.
I apologize. We're gonna move on to our next questioner.
It's more likely to go to war in Australia than Russia.
Hi, my name is Arohi. I'm a student at the Kennedy School. And I don't have a traditional policy issue question. I want to go back to something, Oren, you were mentioning earlier. So what keeps my parents up at night when we're talking about politics is the role of narratives and messaging and the distancing language that's been used so far in this administration. What role do you think rhetoric has in the conservative agenda? And do you think there are any leaders in the Republican Party who are willing to step up to that challenge and move the narrative, shift it from fear and us versus them and alternative facts to, togetherness, and let's get some, facts on the table that we can all agree on?
I think rhetoric is incredibly important and something that, frankly, conservatives don't tend to be very good at. And I mean that as conservatives, as April said, conservatives are not the same as Republicans. I think there have been Republicans who have been very effective. I think conservatives tend to struggle a little bit to find how to convey that they want the same good things for America as everybody else. The messaging isn't always there. I think, unfortunately, this is one of the areas where the balance between a White House and Congress is most uneven. I think it's hard to imagine how kind of right-thinking people in Congress are going to be able to change the narrative or fight with the narrative coming from the White House. If anyone could, I guess it would be somebody like John McCain. You've seen little ripples of John McCain is standing up to Donald Trump. But that will start to have the feel of kind of a 5% pushing against the 95%. And so I think the best we can hope is that behind the scenes, people just keep making efforts to moderate his rhetoric and to help him and his team understand that it's not actually helping his cause to use the rhetoric he does. At the moment, he has, I used that rhetoric and I won the presidential election. Fair point. If things don't go well, I think ideally then there will be maybe some more receptiveness to changing course. But I don't think other voices in the conservative movement or the Republican Party are going to be able to be much of a counterweight.
I think during the election, a lot of us likened it to a fever that was running through the country, and maybe certainly through the party, and we were all sort of hoping it would break. And I thought maybe the election would be the breaking point, where folks kind of got what they wanted, and then there was this sort of, everyone could sort of exhale, and maybe the president would sort of dial it back a little bit, and that does not seem to be the case. And it seems like the public is, I think, just as riled up as they've ever been. I don't know if any of you followed at all this conservative political action conference that's happening this week, but the lineup is just embarrassing. I mean, who was it who said every great cause, starts as a movement and becomes a business and then eventually degenerates into a racket? I mean, that's what we're seeing, right? With sort of this conservative, media / professional conservatives, right? The folks that run a lot of these organizations and that sort of thing. And I just think it's pretty disgusting. But I think there's obviously an appetite for it. I mean, people like novelty. They like this sort of outrageous behavior. And I think that there's really, right now, what's fueling a lot of anger on the right is sort of political correctness and an obsession with it. And I think this sort of false news, narrative fits right into that. I mean, people are disgusted, and in some cases rightly disgusted, I think, by the fact that many colleges don't want to have, folks like us show up and talk about issues. Congratulations to Harvard for doing that. But, I really think that anger is running really high about a lot of issues that are not really policy issues. They're more cultural issues. People are sort of tired of being told what to think by elites, that they don't matter, that they're stupid or uneducated or whatever. And I think that what we saw was a backlash election, and people are just not done yet. They're still really angry. They want to see some things happen. I think Trump has actually been really weak in addressing a lot of these concerns. He really hasn't gotten much done, right? I mean, he's had some bungled, EOs that haven't tied up in the courts and haven't really done anything. I mean, at this point in Obama's presidency, he had passed a stimulus, Lilly Ledbetter, he'd gotten some stuff done, Trump hasn't gotten anything done. He has no real plans that are going to address any of these concerns. And so I don't see people calming down anytime soon. And I know that's a depressing answer, but I think it's true. Do you see people calming down?
Nobody's calm.
Nobody's calm. My hair's on fire all the time. It's just like.
Listen, I think that's actually a great question, because I think, when I looked at the election, to me, I think people were hungering for a forward-looking story that shows how are we going to move forward. We've had a decade of a lousy economy. We've had war. We've had terrorist attacks, and I think people want to know, so what are we going to do? How are we going to deal with with a changing economy, with a changing world, rising China? How's that going to work out? And what Trump offered was a bridge back to 1965, and what Republicans offered was a bridge back to 1980. No one was offering a path forward. I think that's where a lot of that anxiety comes from. Because am I going to send my kid to college? Mm-hmm. They're going to have huge loans. They're going to get out. They're going to get a job, and I'm still going to have to subsidize their apartment. And 4 years later, a robot's going to take their job. I'm not saying all parents think that. Maybe I do, and I worry about that. And making all my kids take computer science classes, even though they'd rather take theater. Maybe that's happening. But I think I think we need to actually tell people a story about this is how it can be. It can be a lot better. Yeah. We don't have to go back to the past, because that's impossible. And I think until politicians start to tell that kind of reality-based story, you're going to get a lot more sort of backward-looking policies.
Well, on that note, we are all out of time, but I want to thank you all for coming out to this event to talk about the future of the conservative agenda. Oren, April, Jim, thank you so much for joining as well.
Thanks for having us.